Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much for joining. You know, I've always had a fascination with academics and academia. Part of that was growing up in a rabbinical home. My father, as I mentioned many times, was a bibliophile, was a great lover of books, and where we live was really predicated on space for his 10,000 books and what we call Severyn in Hebrew, which are Jewish books, many of which are extremely heavy. You know, they're the old Talmudic tractates. And once we were living in an apartment, in fact, we had to have two apartments because the second apartment was essentially my father's library. So as I said, I hold academics in great esteem, and I am therefore delighted to have two academics with me today as my guests. David Kaufman and Norm Raven. How are you guys?
Good, thanks.
Great, nice to be here, Avrum.
It's great to have you. So I want to tell my listeners and viewers a little bit about you and why you're here. The organization of which David and Norm are affiliated with is called the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. It's a national member-run organization that brings together academics, students, professionals, and others interested in the study of the Jewish experience in Canada across multiple disciplines: history, literature, sociology, religion, gender studies, architecture, music, translation, and many others. A little bit about my guest today, Norman Raven, which, by the way, Norman, I love your last name. It's very Jewish, indigenous, something in the middle. It's a lovely name. Yeah, great name. Norman is the past chair of the Canadian Jewish Studies Concordia, Religions and Cultures. He is a professor, and his research area is indeed Canadian Jewish Studies, North American Literature, Holocaust Studies, Eastern Europe, Yiddish literature, creative writing, and he has a whole litany of books and papers that he has published. In 2023, he published "Who Gets In?" An Immigration Story that was University of Regina Press, which blends memoirs, history, and archival work to tell the story of his grandfather's efforts to bring his family after him from Poland in the early 1930s.
It's a great book.
Dave,
I can jump in.
Did you read it?
It's a great book. Everyone should read it. It's really interesting.
Do you guys have to read each other's books?
Written.
We should.
You should. I know. I started a writers club, but I'm still trying to finish the members' stuff that they've written. It's hard, though. It's really hard. David Kaufman is at York University, the Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry and Associate Professor in the Department of History, is a cultural and social historian of modern Jewish life with a specialization in Canadian and U.S. Jewries. So welcome to the show, guys. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
David, let's start with you. Why did you get into Jewish stuff on campus?
You mean get into as a Jewish studies professor, or
yeah? You could have gone many different routes, and you decided to go the Jewish route. Why was that?
Well, I started as an anthropology student for my undergrad and my first master's, and I was really interested in kind of everything but the Jewish world from which I came. But I internalized the lessons of anthropology pretty deeply. One of whose basic claim is that we're really shaped by our history and our culture, and that it's hard to think outside of them. And at a certain point in my, young adult life, I thought, well, I don't really know, let's put it this way, my adult brain knew much more and was engaged in a much more sophisticated way with, secular ideas, with philosophy, with the academy, with things that were sort of happening in our world, compared with my Jewish brain, where I had like a kid's brain as opposed to, and I thought that it was really just important for me to have an encounter with Jewishness and with Judaism, particularly this thing called tradition, which I didn't have incredible exposure to growing up. And as I started to engage with it, with an adult brain and an adult heart and an adult mind, I found it just really deeply compelling. And it started me on a journey that ended. Well, it didn't end, of course. These journeys don't end, but it brought me to kind of fusing my love for the academy and for things Jewish.
Well, what do you love about things Jewish? What's it to you?
Well, I love being connected to an intellectual tradition, a tradition that discusses and debates and that asks many questions, that sort of valorizes being part of the book, as it were. You spoke about your father's library and your connection to it. So it's sort of a similar feeling, I think, for me about being connected to a network that crosses space, but also, explodes time, that we're a part of a conversation with other people trying to figure out and think about what it means to be human, to be deeply human in a way, with a set of tools that we have. And I'm pleased to be the inheritor of those tools. And I think it's, I don't know.
Okay. What did your dad do for a living?
He was a GP, a family practitioner, a doctor. My mother was a teacher, on again, off again teacher. She taught French and she taught ESL to mostly adult students.
Yeah, I always fell in love with teachers. just love them. Your mom is soft, gentle, sensitive person.
She is. She can be, mostly.
She can be, right?
Yeah.
What was the Jewishness like in your home?
We were kind of on again, off again in the Reform movement here in Toronto. My grandparents were, all of them were Eastern European born, spoke Yiddish, had Yiddish accents, spoke English, of course, as well. And so we felt pretty culturally Jewish. They were all tied to labor Zionist organizations. I went to public school. I went to summer camps at the Young Judea system, and that was pretty deep and important. I had a few trips to Israel before I was an adult, which were very meaningful to me too.
And Norman, once again, welcome to the show. Does anybody still call you Norman?
Well, the answer is kind of no. There's a few friends out there that used to, and my mom did, but she's gone. So it's mostly not Norman anymore. Yeah.
Right. So when someone calls you Norman, it's more like, now Norman. So Norm, what brought you to Judaism, the Jewishness of life within the university context?
So it was more roundabout, I think, in the sense that I went to university just because I wanted to be there, and my training was all literary with some historical framing. But then I kept allowing myself to do things that traveled in personal directions, and I was lucky, I guess, that I had profs that let papers follow that lead. And so by the time I was doing an MA, it was being Holocaust related and Canadian writers whom I related to as a young writer. So it was always this kind of cheating, personal searching by way of academic work. And I didn't make a proper decision about how to apply that till I had to get into a PhD program. But I still stuck with Holocaust-related literature at that point, but still trying to do things that I had brought forward from my own personal interest and to mirror your own memories of your folks. My mom had a house full of books, and we must have taken 25 magazine subscriptions. So the influence of all that reading and presence of stuff in the house, it just carried through. And then by the time I was in a PhD program, you start to be formed by the discipline itself. But my discipline was English, you could say English studies, although I was always edging towards Jewish writers, even if the faculty weren't present to guide me on that. And even in the 90s, when I was in PhD context, you had a lot of Jewish faculty, but they weren't necessarily focused on Jewish materials. So they would take you on as a kind of a personal favor. So that personal framework continued with me all the way into my PhD. And you could say that was a terrible set of decisions because none of it was, canonically driven or professionally driven, but somehow the luck came my way, and it still worked
Let
out.
me ask,
Sort of an unusual.
I'm watching my son. He just completed his first year at U of T, and he did extremely well. And he just got, accepted to the Monk School of Strategic Planning, and I'm still trying to remember the rest of it. It's beautiful to watch him because he's a natural thinker, and he's taking 2 courses this year at U of T this summer because he wants to study, because he wants to learn. And I'm so deeply proud because that's my background. I come from the yeshiva world. And when I was 13 years old, I was learning Baba Batra, one of the Gemaras that I talked about. You're sitting in these very dingy green rooms in the yeshiva, school. If 2 partners should own a piece of land and the fence happens to fall, you're 13 years old, When did you realize, Norm, that the thinking was where you wanted to take your career?
Yeah, I think I was more driven by the idea of creativity. If I could find something to do that would be creative, I thought I would be happiest. And you're right that our good graduate level teachers make you think and read things that make you think. So maybe it was the PhD level at which you arrive at that awareness of yourself. Your guys maybe being pressed in directions more coherent and kind of careful than I was at my younger years.
You were not careful?
No.
How did that
free
translate?
throw? Well, I try a lot of things, I guess, and seek out friends and teachers and contexts that seem to be acceptable and comfortable and motivating, and those were always available at our universities. I'm older than David, but we came up at a good time when there weren't so many kind of practical-oriented pressures. At least that's how I feel now. And somehow the experience of university life was quite freewheeling in my years. You could make a few mistakes.
I bounced around a lot as well before I ended up in the academy. I did documentary film work for a couple of years. I spent a year at yeshiva in Jerusalem.
Which yeshiva?
At Pardes, Machon Pardes.
Sure. Yeah.
Sort of a co-ed, ecumenical, little bit of an outlier in the yeshiva world, but yeshiva nonetheless. And I did a master's in public administration in New York City. I did a whole bunch of things before I sort of settled on, and I was actually quite on the fence about whether or not I wanted to have a career in academia until it happened for me. I had a postdoc after my PhD in New York. And I'm incredibly grateful to have a position. There's a lot of very talented people who come out of the system with brilliant ideas and are really charismatic, and they can't get work. And I got work in the city that I wanted to be in here in Toronto, working in the field. And I'm planning on being very happy until the day I retire, and then happy after that.
Yeah, you're a bit like Mitch Marner, right? You stayed in the town where you were born to play hockey
until
probably now. I'm always curious about the life of a professor, barring the stuff that's challenging nowadays on campus, in particular as Jews. I just really want to focus for a moment on the thinking aspect of it, on the preparation for your classes, David. Would you sit there at your desk and flip open a bunch of books, think about a concept, think about an idea, see what the tensions are within that thought and idea, and then ultimately bring it to your classroom? Is that the exciting part of it? I think it would be from me.
Well, course design is really exciting. You kind of sketched out how to structure and plan a specific lecture, which is also exciting. For me, course design is even more exciting. So you think, okay, I've got 12 sessions or I've got 24 sessions. It's at this level of the curriculum. These are the kind of skills that I expect students will be coming in with. And let me think up a whole course. And I have to think about the A story, which travels from the beginning of the course until the end of the course over 12 weeks, like a TV series. But I also have to think about each of the units and the B story that I tell and do both of them, as well as mix up, what kinds of fundamental question we're grappling with that week, and then how to bring primary sources, other people's ideas in books and chapters and articles that we want to bring to the table, and then how to design the actual right down to the lecture itself. So it is a fun nut to crack. It takes a lot of work. We professors do 3-4 courses a year. Sometimes people do a lot more. They obviously repeat some courses, but also want to change them up every couple of years because it starts to get stale. So there's a lot of content to work through for sure. And then public lectures are totally different ball of wax, where you have a different kind of audience and you've got less time, and they're all interesting, unique circumstances. And the learners are adults, and they're interested in different ways, and they come with different things to the table. So all of that teaching and pedagogy design stuff is pretty fun. And it's just maybe at this point, maybe a quarter or a fifth of my, what's on my plate as a professor.
Norm, I want to sort of ask you a similar question, but I'm picture you standing in front of a bunch of students. How many students would you generally have in your class?
They'll range, I guess, from 35 to 75 in an undergrad group, not a seminar crowd, but that'd be a typical undergrad.
Do you like the 35 or 75, the bigger numbers or the smaller numbers?
Well, it's fair to the students when it's 35. I don't mind doing it for the 75 can be equally successful, and you're sort of just extending your reach. And then, of course, there's many more who can hide in the back if that's the way they feel comfortable. But the students it's fair for them if they get to know each other more. But increasingly, the universities are filling up the big classrooms.
So about the students themselves, I do a lot of lecturing myself and speaking. And I watch myself as I do it, and I find that I'm trying to connect with somebody or some bodies in the room whose eyes are really wide open, who really want to hear what you have to say. What sort of relationship do you develop within the time of a given lecture? Do you see those people who are really, really listening closely?
So I do want to get to know them all. That's my starting point. Then you do find out the ones that don't need to get to know you or prefer to stay to the background. And then, as you say, you find the ones who are most sort of brightly present and brightly attentive. And there's always plenty of those. It's a rare class where you're without a nice group of those. So I would only say that things have shifted as I've grown older, because for a long time I felt, well, I'm just in touch with them. I know what they're thinking and how they look at the world. But now there's a big enough age gap that's an extra challenge, and I have to learn that as I go. That relationship has changed a little bit as the age difference has increased between myself and a group of young people, 18 to 20 years old.
In some ways, are you raising these young people? Are you an integral part of their lives?
Well, you're sure opening up aspects of either the world or materials or, whether it's political or literary outlooks that they may not have encountered before. So that's a kind of raising. And they'll thank you for that sometimes afterward and say they hadn't had an opportunity like that before. So you're putting them in some kind of new range of experience that they will appreciate and tell you about.
David, what happens when you find a superstar of thought within your environment? How do you approach that person?
Well, I tell them that they're superstars.
You do tell them?
Sure, of course. I tell them that they're punching above their weight. I encourage them to, I say, like, what do you think about next? Do you want to go interested in grad school, or you want to go to some professional track? How can I be helpful? Sometimes I volunteer to write reference letters for students, and ask them to come to let's meet for coffee, or come to my office, and we'll chat and see if I can help make things happen. There are some superstar undergraduates and early grad students who I can also could and do tap to work with me as research assistants, or people for whom I think, it would be great if they could work on this project or that project, because they seem smart and they seem motivated and they seem really competent, like they can actually get stuff done in the world without intense supervision. So I like to use the tools that I have at my disposal in the my academic, wearing my various different kinds of academic hats, and then
Yeah.
give people opportunities to build their careers and figure out what they want to do and expand.
So
I just wanted to make one quick comment as well about your last comment about Norm, about sort of identity seeking. And Jewish studies is similar, I think, probably to some other ethnic studies areas of the academy, where we get some number of students that are identity seekers themselves, that are taking Jewish studies classes because they want to figure out what it means that they're Jewish. In some cases, they're only partly Jewish, maybe one parent, maybe one grandparent. There's a lot of people who are at the sort of Jewish margins who maybe didn't have a lot of exposure to Jewish leaders or Jewish institutions, and maybe don't even want them. That's a little bit too close to the community, but the university classroom is a great space for them to sort of try on some things and start to feel what it's like. So they're, of course, learning alongside some deeply identified Jews and many non-Jews altogether. And the university classroom is a space for all that. So I find some number of students who are in a kind of identity pursuit, and they look to me and my colleagues, Jewish studies colleagues, to some degree, with a kind of a parenting eye. That might be career, and it might be identity, and it's an interesting dance.
Yeah, it sounds like quite the pas de deux. Norman, there's all kinds of discussions around my family Shabbos table. My family's Orthodox. I'm not. So we come at things differently. But that being said, about the university environment now, there is a strong sense amongst my sisters, my brother-in-laws, my nieces and nephews, that campuses are now woke, and that riffing on ideas is limited, right? And if you the professor comes up with a particular position on Israel, on Jewry, world Jewry or Canadian Jewry, that person can be castigated. How true or not true is that?
So it's such a hot topic right now. So your family is so like so many others, and I talk about this with lots of people outside of academic contexts, and the idea that a campus is something that I almost never say that word, but is woke, is so unrealistic and so unlike what the full complement of population of academics, population of students is, that it's kind of an unrealistic possibility. It really couldn't be true. So there are some departments where a certain kind of, gathering of profs might express a certain kind of political view. But that would generally not be the case in most departments. And in my context, I'm in it's a religion and cultures department. So we have a Jewish studies complement, we have Christianity, Hinduism, we have people that teach indigenous studies. There's just no way that there would be any kind of political coherence to that group of people. And when we meet at a department meeting, we don't talk about those things. And I wouldn't know, in fact, what my colleagues' political outlooks are, except in a couple of cases. So then when you narrow it down to the Jewish studies context, we're really kind of a generational grouping. So there's people older, people my age, people younger. So those are different makeups in academic contexts too. And typically, we're not teaching things along the lines of what your family might be expecting. So if I'm teaching Holocaust literature, those kinds of issues are not in play, rather the pre-war context and the wartime context, and you could go in leftist and right-wing directions in that area, but it's really not what's at stake. So what those comments are speaking to are certain kind of politicization among students, merely, I would say, or mostly. And in my teaching of 100 some each year, it never comes up in my classroom. Somehow I keep them on track, whether we're doing Holocaust, whether we're doing Canadian Jewish literature, whether we're doing decolonizing and history related to our campus. There might be a way that those issues could come in, but they do not come in because that's not what we're studying. And somehow they've got it that, okay, he's running this in a different track. So I'm answering in all kinds of ways. I also, to be more direct about that kind of a doubt about university atmosphere. I do think that those comments are kind of Fox News talking points, and it's a outcome of the dominance of the American media scene in our country. And often that American media scene would speak maybe more directly to what's going on at American universities, and it has rather little to do with what goes on our campus. Although we have our own troubles, of course. That's not to say that we don't, but we've got our own special case on that front.
All right, so let's flip that question over to David at York University. I myself attended York University. I was very involved in Hillel, and we had some run-ins in Central Square with whom I would determine people being anti-Semitic and other people being curious, maybe aggressively curious. Have you been a victim, if you will, of anti-Semitism at York University?
No, I haven't been a victim of anti-Semitism at York. I help run the Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies there, so I'm in the history department where I do my teaching and do committee work with colleagues to help run the university. And then another big part of my job is to help run this center, which brings together faculty and graduate students from the law school and from the faculty of education and from all the different spots in school to kind of do public events, to do talks, to do conferences and symposia, to whatever, do all the kinds of Jewish studies academic stuff. So I'm a fairly well-known Jewish studies person on campus. And no, I mean, I'm across a lot of conversations, that are sometimes difficult since October 23. But no, I mean, all of my non-Jewish colleagues, they sort of get it. They get, they get me. They're accommodating, they're attentive. They invite me to come to meetings to help work through difficult issues if there are tensions in departments or conflicts between, say, students and their graduate students and their supervisors, or issues about conduct. I speak very, very regularly with the university president and provost and the vice presidents and the heads of, the human rights office and many other kinds of mid and senior level administrators about kind of helping to steer the university on a good path. And no, I mean, not a single bit of hate mail, nothing slid under my door, no foolish or malicious comments. So no is my answer about my own personal experience. It's not to say that there aren't hard things happening. There are hard things happening.
Yeah.
You asked about my experience, and I'd say no. I feel very, very welcome and enfranchised.
Norm, did you want to pick up on that?
No, Dave was just describing well how it would feel at Concordia. It's a good wrap up. Yeah.
I'll add just really quickly that it's been interesting to me that if you typed, Jewish studies or Jewish York University, you wouldn't be too far down on the Google hit list before finding my name. And of all of the press that there is out there about York and Concordia actually were two of the universities that have long legacies of Israel-Palestine debate and tension and accusations of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Very few journalists have ever reached out to me and say, "Hey, can we chat about what's happening?" And yet they write articles and they write op-eds. They often repeat things that other people have said.
I even, without naming the guy, ran across something that was a version of what David's describing, which was a report on Concordia's events over the last year or so. And I thought there was a lot of things that were wrong, and some of them were just factual errors, and others were, I knew what it was going on the street corner of de Maisonneuve and my office building. So I said, "I'm glad to talk to you." And he wouldn't get on the phone. He wanted me to write my talking points back to him. I said, "No, I'm not going to do your research for you." So it was even an instance where I was offering free follow-up, but he wanted it just entirely on his own terms. So I didn't do it.
So where's the noise coming from? Because there's a lot of noise about anti-Semitism on campus. A lot.
In our case, some spectacular stuff out on the street, and also in a hallway in our main building. And the dynamics of those events are ugly and complicated and need teasing out the way David suggests journalists maybe aren't doing. So it's those kind of singular events. Maybe there'll be one in a term, and then there'll be one out on the street corner. It's something really big, gets on all the news, and people hear about it in Jerusalem. So it must be really bad in Montreal. And then everything just reverts to that signal event rather than the fuller picture of how our institutions run and the experience of being a student at them.
Avram, I'm sure you and some of your Jewish listeners have lived and spent time in Israel, and their family members or friends here are watching the news and saying, "Oh my God, it's so dangerous, it's so terrible, what's happening?" And they say, "No, this is just like it looks a little different when you filter reality through news, and this is just a kind of problem of a perspective problem." I mean, this is not to deny that there are real issues, of course, but it just looks a little bit different on the inside, and it's a lot less troublesome.
Mhm.
And I think there's so much anxiety in the Jewish community, a lot of traumatic response. We're a traumatized people, and that's not our faults. And we are, we want to see our pain reflected and acknowledged. And so that means we kind of look for it, and we in some ways amplify it so that we can be seen, and then are frustrated when it's not seen. This is different from trying to understand what a situation is in a particular institution. And anti-Semitism, of course, is on campus because it's out there in society, just as there's sexism in society and therefore sexism on campus, or racist stuff and lots of other bad stuff that's in society and therefore on campus as well. So,
Okay. So, Norman, if you decided one day to come to class with a big black kippah on your tzitzis hanging out and maybe a very distinct mug and doven around your neck, would everything be cool? Everybody be cool?
It wouldn't be me to do it, but our department chair wears a kippah. And just as David responded to the victim question with a no, our department chair has never had any kind of targeting experience. So I would just use him in place of myself. He's the real thing. He shows up every day. He's running the department, religions and cultures, kippah on his head, not an issue.
So if we were to look at America and the campuses on America, the encampments, and Jews being blocked from coming to classes and so on, is there at all an Americanization of the campuses here?
Who should take that?
David.
Tell us about Toronto on that front.
Well, maybe in our show notes we can put, there's a great study that we ran in the journal Canadian Jewish Studies that our organization is officially the publisher of, that sociologist named Bob Brim wrote about understanding the encampments, who in Toronto or in Canada, who were the people encamping, what did they believe, what did they think, what do we sort of know about them in a social scientific sense, an actual social science sense, as well as about Canadians' attitudes to the encampments. And I prefer this kind of thing, like, a research subject. I think the encampments are worth studying, worth understanding. The one that was on my campus was came and went in less than 24 hours. The one at U of T, has just a really interesting and whatever. It's a long drama. There's a lot to say with litigation and union rights and whatever, all that stuff. I would just say I'm in touch with a lot of people who run Jewish studies centers in the United States. And there's a huge variety of the situation there. So I don't know that there's an Americanization that could happen in Canada. If you go to a small liberal arts private school, it's very different than going to a big state school. If you go to a state school that's in a red state as opposed to a blue state, I mean, there's a huge variety of situations. My hunch is that there's many, 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 many interesting and good situations for Jews, including how different campus cultures have dealt with the Israel-Palestine conflict and the anti-Semitism question in really tremendously wonderful, heartfelt, good ways. And it doesn't reach the news. Right? We as news consumers in general want the bad news, and we want to feel, Our brains are being fracked for our anxiety and our frustration, and it's mental clickbait. So likewise in Canada, there are many, many interesting, wonderful, good, positive things to point to that are not making news stories. A lot of good learning that's happening, a lot of de-escalation work that's happening in administrations, in classrooms, on campus, outside of classrooms. There's a lot of good stuff to point to that we just tend not to look at.
And Montreal does have its own, set of terms, and big immigrant population here from Arab countries. And that's an ongoing flow. And the Jews used to fancy themselves to be the most important minority in the city, and they're not any longer. They're not the major numbers that they used to be. And then leftism on Quebec campuses has its own character, not American. Your question's a good one, but really Quebec-oriented leftism that goes back to the separatist movement. So our whole story of student activism has kind of got its own character in some way.
Norman, you know what? I'm seeing images of all kinds of people listening to you and not believing you. Is that your experience?
Yeah.
When you talk about the positive nature of campus,
thanks for
and
saying
the Jews,
that. Yeah. No, I talk to people personally. I can see it in their eyes that they don't believe me, and I don't say anything because I'm not a pastor. It's not my role in life to shift their minds. If whatever it is so dramatically fixed, if they hear me from my 25, 26 years of experience, any number of kind of key moments, and then the recent couple of years, of course, so specific, and they still have that look in their eye that's saying, what's he saying, or why is he bothering with this stuff? I don't know what the answer is to that exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I speak with lots of folks, and of course they say, oh, what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm a professor at York. And they say, oh my God. And then we talk. And most of them, when I share with them some detail, they say, oh, that's good to hear.
Or surprise. Yeah.
But they are surprised. They are surprised.
Or it's the look of no change in perspective.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an aspect of this conversation and others whereby we and David, you touched on it before. We have to be very careful as Jews to see anti-Semitism when it's there, but when it's not, to recognize, hey, that's not anti-Semitism, right?
We do, and that's not an easy thing to do. I'm teaching a course right now, a summer course at double speed on the history of anti-Semitism. Of course, we deal in the most contemporary period with the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We also deal with contemporary anti-Semitism from the right and the left, as things to sort of properly talk about. The class is 70% non-Jewish. Everyone's really interested in learning. Everyone gets it. There's no big controversy. The classroom doesn't fall apart. It's just good. It's good learning. There's also good research about anti-Semitism on campus and in our culture in Canada in particular out there. There's another study that we published in the journal last summer, a proper social science survey about Canadians' attitudes towards Jews and Israel. And one of the interesting findings in that study was that far and away most non-Jewish Canadians have very positive attitudes towards Jews, something like in the high 80s or 90 something. That number being higher if they have had personal encounters with Jews in any way. The number, of course, of Canadians who have good attitudes, positive attitudes towards Israel is much less, somewhere around 55, I think, if I remember right. But the non-Jews insist, and the questionnaires are designed to suggest that they have actually really positive feelings about Jews, even if they themselves have criticisms of Israel or don't like Israel at all. And so while Canadian Jews insist that anyone who's anti-Israel must also be anti-Semitic, our non-Jewish neighbors don't think this. So this is an interesting problem and puzzle for us to think through a little more carefully. And I think it's a good thing to have studies, to have data-driven scholarship that tries to help us think through these things and to engage with research. That's one of the reasons that guess Norm and I are on the podcast, is to talk about the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies, which is it's the kind of vehicle through which we hope new research, historical research like mine, literary research like Norm's, social science, all kinds of other scholarly research about the experience and the lives of Canadian Jews can be the subject of thoughtful study, and that we could perhaps share that back with the Jewish community first and foremost, but also with non-Jewish Canadians who are interested in thinking about and including Jewish perspectives and experiences, as well as the global Jewish studies world, who are interested or should be interested in what's happening in Canada, because Canada is the fourth largest diaspora Jewish community in the world, will soon be the third, overtaking France probably within a generation. So we have a lot of audiences to try to reach, I think it should be thoughtful studies and conversations about Canadian Jewish life. We're a community that basically doesn't know itself all that well or think about itself all that much. And that's one of the goals that I think Norma and I share, if I could speak for him, to help change that.
All right. So, by the way, you're brilliant at setting up segues, David. So thank you for that. Let's take, yeah, he's good at it. So let's take one of those segues. We are talking now about the Association of Canadian Jewish Studies, of which Norman is the president and David is the journal editor. So rather than me giving a synopsis of what the ACJS is, Norman, why don't you tell us what it is?
So I came into it as a graduate student by way of an older faculty member, should name him Richard Menkes. So some people like David are good at bringing in young students and developing them in the direction of this field. So that was my foray. My fields really, you could say, are too spread around in some way for me to have seen myself in this context in late career. But it increasingly seemed important that we distinguish ourselves, and Dave said it well, and that there are lots of our colleagues who think of Jewish studies kind of in a more generic way, and the distinctive Canadian angle is satisfying and it's real, and if you work on it in a literary context the way I do, it's a way of making your own materials seen and heard. So Canadian Jewish writers is often what I'm pursuing. And then what we're doing as an organization at the sort of foundation level is giving voice to academics, but then also looking for the students, the kind of people that David describes, who could find their way into this territory and maybe be drawn in this direction to add this or make it to some degree their focus. So we have a conference every year, and that's an ongoing success. We just had one in Ottawa that really had a nice complement of PhD and MA students who are from a range of disciplines, but somehow, maybe a bit like I described, needed that place for the Jewish angle of their research. So that's a most basic way that the organization is serving students and academics who are their teachers.
At the conference, well, you have a lot of experience with this, but what is it like being in a room of PhDs and MAs? Would lay people fit in?
Yeah, we've always attracted those, and we had some fun ones this year. It's an ongoing feature. So there was a father and son panel. The father is a usual appearance at our conference. He does medical research with Jewish flavor, and this time the son showed up too. He's a forester. He had forestry research with a Canadian Jewish flavor. So those people are in the minority, and they're courageous, because the rest of us, are doing something with a little bit of a different tenor to it. But we definitely have made room over the years and ongoing success with that at the conference.
Did you remember anything about what he said, the forester?
Well, he'd uncovered, it was a good story. So he'd uncovered the history of an important, not Canadian born, but Canadian practicing forester who had a hidden Jewish past that was Holocaust related. And then the way that he brought those two narratives together, forestry influence and hidden Jewish past, was kind of the special key to his talk.
That's fascinating.
Neat.
I love the fact that you were very creative and brought in the father and the son. That's beautiful.
We had a couple of good organizers as usual, and they were just had the ear out for the good stories.
Yeah. I mean, I think the beautiful thing about your jobs is that you're called upon to be creative, right?
You're right.
You're not making teapots in a manufacturing environment. You have to think.
It's
right?
better if we're not doing that. Yeah.
It's much better.
There are some traditional things that academics make, which are conferences where people present, new ideas and new research, and journals where people publish article versions of this. Those are the kind of traditional outputs. But the organization has been, and the field as a whole has been trying to make a public pivot in recent years, trying to do things that are not just sort of by scholars for scholars, but really are meant to reach a broader public. So we launched our own podcast a couple of months ago. We're building a digital humanities project now about the early Jewish families of pre-Confederation Canada. So it's sort of Jews from the 1700s and early 1800s. And
the Hart family, right? Yeah.
The Hart family, one among, this website is going to feature 18 different families, their family trees, where they lived, and the kind of documentation that we managed to collect from archives, mostly from the Godfrey collections at the Clara Thomas Archives, and sort of show the documents of these folks' lives. So this is kind of a teaching tool that will be geared for high school students and teachers and university students, but not a kind of hardcore academic project. We are planning on launching a new literary journal, walking tours. There's kind of a whole bunch of things that this association, which was founded in the 70s as the Canadian Jewish Historical Society, and then changed its name in the 90s to the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies, because it recognized that not every scholar or archivist or museum professional who's involved in sort of Jewish studies thinking was a historian, but they also come from lots of different disciplines. And this organization, so we've been around for, I guess we'll be approaching 50 years in the next couple of years, has again doing this much more public outward turn, because I think I'd say we understand that there's a bigger demand for thinking about Canadian Jewish life and what makes this community unique, and all the stories of the people who've contributed to Canadian life, and the issues that are sort of uniquely Canadian, even though they clearly have some semblance of the same stories in Argentina or in South Africa or Australia or the United States, but there's a demand for it. And so there's people want to know. And I think partly that's because, the post-October 7th world has turned Jews inward and made a lot more Jews think about what it means to be Jewish and to be part of the Jewish people in some way. And so they want to think things through. And there's been a kind of Canadian turn since Trump took office, where, a surge of Canadian patriotism or nationalism or just self-reflexivity. What does it mean that we're Canadian? And I think this kind of double inward turn can point Jews in the direction of thinking more carefully and learning more about their own Canadian Jewish pasts.
So, Norm, I want to pick up on what David's saying. Firstly, you used the word pivot. And when I think of pivot, to me, it's almost like a new generation of leadership. I'm going to guess, I think in 1976, when it began, the Association of Canadian Jewish Studies, that it was probably much different than it is today. So it seems to me, and tell me if I'm correct, that you're thinking in very sort of cutting edge terms, in modern terms. I'm going to guess that you're implementing AI in some ways. And my second question to you is, what is the Canadianization of Jewry, of Judaism? In other words, if I were to go to France and I would spend time with the French Jewish community, what would I see differently than I see here in Canada?
So you're asking a lot of big questions.
They are big questions. Yeah.
You're right that at the early stages it was, so you didn't say it, so it was mostly all men. When the organization started, it was men with a certain kind of training. Lots of them were historians for particular kinds of reasons, what was working for Jewish men in the academy at that time. And then the work that came out of that was specific, and the most famous book of that cohort is The None is Too Many,
Irving Abel.
Abel and Troper. So that book could represent that era in some way. And then the thing you say is right, that the interdisciplinary quality that you're hearing from us reflects sort of the range of possibilities for Jewish academics in university life today, sort of very open-ended and different. So it's a generational shift. And then David isn't exactly blowing his horn as he should, because we're supported by some very strong infrastructure and resources and key efforts at York in connection with a couple of the chair in particular that David holds and some other activities at York. So that there's a moment where this association is kind of being held by some bigger players and is being appreciated and is being motivated in directions that we may not have been able to go on our own. So it's kind of an interesting infrastructural moment for our association, and it reflects two strengths at one Canadian university. In this case, that's York. So I haven't made my way through all your questions. What was the last stage of it?
Part B is, how would I see French Jewry different than I would in Canada? Yeah.
Well, so everyone's going to answer that one differently, but the materials are so crucial. So David mentions research studies that he's been following and publishing. In my case, it's literature. For other people, it might be photography or visual art, but real careful and enthusiastic attention to our materials without necessarily contrast and comparison. You might want to do that, but you don't need to. And you don't have to feel that you're in the shadow of American Jewish representation and study and research, but rather make those materials as richly felt and known as you can. So the organization then, of course, is a space that gives you that opportunity. So,
David, to answer that second question.
So I like Norm's starting answer, which is that you ask a lot of, Canadian Jewish academics or Canadian Jewish leaders for that matter, they'll give you different answers. So there are lots of them. Some of them are that we have simply our own history that's different from the American Jewish history or the French Jewish history. We have just different twists and turns about law and political involvement and, who's done what to gain us rights here and how they took shape and what our contributions have been like to this particular country, how it's unfolded. We have some Canadian cultural elements. So Canadian Jews are like Canadians in many, many ways, just like French Jews are like other French citizens in many ways. So in some of the ways that we're uniquely Canadian and sometimes have a hard time putting our finger on what that means, yet we still know it. Well, there's the Jewish dimension to that as well. That's a constitutional issue. That's a legacy of our bicultural or tricultural founding nations, our French, Indigenous, and English situations. There's a temperament thing. There's a history thing. There's a lot, and there's actually an interesting and sort of rich literature out there that one can read about Canadian Jewish life and identity. The journal we published just last week published volume number 40. So that's 40. It's not quite Shas, a Gemara, a set of Talmudic tractates, but it's a pretty good stretch of wall space of hundreds of different scholars who have written about some aspects of uniquely Canadian Jewish life.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the journal. It's the only journal devoted to the study of Canadian Jewry. It's Canadian Jewish Studies. It's an open access scholarly journal that includes full-length peer-reviewed articles, from a variety of scholarly disciplines, book reviews, special sections devoted to translations of important primary sources, etc. So what I was wondering about is, how does a journal become a scholarly journal? Where do you apply for that? How did it have the accreditation or the success at a very scholarly level that it wouldn't have had if it was just a regular sort of newsletter that you sent out regularly?
Right. So part of it is that most of the contributors are scholars themselves. So if you want to publish, an article about something that happened in Canadian Jewish history, then you need the work to pass what's called peer review. So there's a kind of baked in process for getting published, meaning you submit an article and it has to kind of conform to the quality standards of your own discipline. If that's sociology, it's got one thing. If that's history, it's another. And then there's a double-blind peer review process. So the journal editor will send out the paper without the name of the author to a couple of experts, who read it carefully and who provide feedback and say, this is good, or this isn't good, or this has to change. And sometimes there's several rounds of that. And then it's eligible to be published. That's part of what makes it an academic journal and not like a magazine. The other part is that it's connected to a kind of tech network that allows for academics to be able to find those articles for researchers who are interested. So if you're in France or you're in Australia and you're interested in Jews, or you're interested in, say, just intermarriage, or you're interested in the relationships between Jews and Muslims, then you can find articles that appear in this journal like other academic journals through your own university library website, wherever you are in the whole world. And so the journal itself doesn't just have its circulation of subscribers, essentially, but it's part of a network for researchers to find research data, information. So those are the two big things: the process and the world in which it circulates.
I find that all fascinating. Norman, is it painstaking to write an article that will ultimately be published? Is that really difficult work?
Everyone answers, regarding their work in different ways. I mean, no, I just feel pleasure in that kind of project, and care. You want to make sure it's done carefully. And then the breadth that will allow it to have something original set to be said in it. And then the confidence that you've covered the ground, all those kinds of other things. So no, painstaking wouldn't be my first choice. Rather, it's all those different subsets of skills that kind of writer must bring to come out with a good outcome. Good.
And what's it like between the time that you submit to the time that it goes through a peer review and then ultimately comes back and they say, Norman, your article, your publication was... What's that like?
Well, do you mean how long or
no? What's it like for you in your spilkas, in your guts?
I think the best thing is to not think about it and then just wait till you get the word back, and then be as sometimes you're not as calm about editorial suggestions as you should be. So the odd time I can remember myself getting a little uppity, like, what's going on here? I'm being told how this could be better. And then usually I realize after the fact that those editorial suggestions were useful and appropriate. So receiving that stuff calmly is a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love the way you're going with this organization, and I really want to tell my listeners, my viewers, that I think you have something really special here. Initially, when our friend, mutual friend Linda, asked me to do this interview, I was a little hesitant because I had no sense of the organization and what you were all about. But when I was doing my research, I see too, and I think this is very wise. I did this within my own organization, is that you've created awards. And I think the first ones were probably created near the year 2000, but since then you've developed that, the Louis Rosenberg Award, the Marcia Koven Award, and the Professor Gerald Tulchinsky Award, and which is lovely that you name it after these people. How do you go about finding the winners for these awards?
So we have a nominations committee and a person that oversees that. And it usually happens around the time of the conference, which becomes kind of our public activities at the conference. And then it is a way that colleagues start to look at one another and support one another. And then the student related awards are the outcome of the conference itself. So we just chose 2 good student papers to support that were given at the conference. Yeah.
I think you can make a difference in a student's life through such things as awards. When you recognize someone, you're essentially saying you're not academically or intellectually invisible. And I've seen that in my own life through my own work. When you recognize somebody through an award, people say, well, I put it up on my wall, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal. David, I want to ask you a final question. What are you hoping for or through this organization happens in a big way? What's your big vision, your big goal for the organization?
Well, the big goal is for the 400,000 Canadian Jews, a community of which I'm a proud part of, to know themselves better, to have more interesting conversations about ourselves, about our past, about our politics, about our culture, about our society, about our issues, just a higher level of engagement with the sort of intersection of our Canadianness and our Jewishness. That's the kind of the big picture. I hope a lot of other people are part of that conversation too, including lots of non-Jews and partial Jews, and including a lot of other people outside of our own national boundaries who are thinking about diasporic life and global Jewish life, because we're basically like a bigger player than we really get in the Jewish world. We sort of punch under our weight, a very Canadian kind of thing. The other tachlis thing is that I hope one day we'll be able to build a Canadian National Museum. We have a lot of the infrastructure that we're doing with the association are the very kinds of things that a museum professional team would do: events, conferences, public-facing initiatives, educational initiatives. And that's kind of stuff that we're doing increasingly, and I think very well, at a really high quality stuff that we're putting out there. And it would be nice to have like an actual brick and mortar home somewhere where we told the story in the one story, or a complex rich story about the history of the Jews of this country. We've been around since the 1740s. It's a really long time.
Yes.
We don't have a national institution. They do in France, and they do in Australia, and they've got lots in the States. And I think we're a community that's worth telling our own story, knowing our own story, and then developing, unique and beautiful and rich, fascinating stories about ourselves.
Where would you build it?
Where would I build it?
Yeah.
There's a spot, if I could snap my fingers and raise however many millions of dollars it would take, I would build it in that building right across from the ROM on the south corner, the southwest corner of Avenue of Bloor and University. Yeah. It's the beautiful home economics old building of the university.
Yes.
There's like a clothing store pop up there. It's a gorgeous building. Yeah. It's right across from all these other museums. Yeah. I would want it to be, in a downtown place that was it was a story that Jews told, but it was an outward facing story, a story that we told to tourists who came from all over the world to visit our amazing country and our amazing city. And I would want it to be there. There's other places that I'd be willing to build it, but we're a little ways away.
Or there may be places that you'll have to build it. Norman, I was speaking the other night. I was the MC for a Jewish heritage program, and it was through B'nai B'rith, and they decided to approach it through Jewish food. And I was chosen because I had a restaurant and food show on the radio for 10 years with my dear partner, Marty Gallen, who just passed away. And I'm very Jewish. So they thought, okay. So I asked the people on the panel, Ruthie Ladovsky from United Dairies, Shlomo Asayag, who deals in religious food online, and Judy Purley from the Bloor Street Diner. I said, do you all feel like emissaries for the Jewish people? Because I believe that there's a hat that most of us wear, which is when we go out in public, I'm the Jew. I'm seen as the Jew. Therefore, I have to represent our people in a particular way. And I hear that from a lot of people, in particular those who are outwardly identifiable as Jews. Are you a Jewish emissary, Norman? Do you see yourself that way through the organization?
Oh, okay. So through the organization is another story, but not through food, but through all the attention I pay to landscape and the idea that our landscape hides all kinds of good stories, and some of them Jewish, so that my writing has focused on hidden stories like that. And in that way, bringing an aspect of history and urban life and rural life to readers that maybe wasn't known. So my emissary goals work in that direction. And sure, by taking the presidency of this organization, you can't say I haven't placed myself in that way. And I don't claim a lot of authority. Rather, I'm just satisfied working with the group of people that have kind of gathered in this context and it's satisfying. So I guess we share it. I don't claim it, but we share it. Yeah.
But David, just to pick up on that, when you walk outside, metaphorically or otherwise, are you the Jew? Do you see yourself as such?
Yeah, I do. I had this experience, as an undergrad when I was an anthropology student, as I was talking about at the start of the show, where I basically felt, like I'm understood by others as a Jew. I was born a Jew. I'm going to die a Jew. I'll be buried in a Jewish cemetery somewhere. And it's going to be up to me to sort of figure out what it means. And I have to have a serious encounter with it. So since my career and life have taken, public Jewish knowledge turns, I'm seen inevitably by my colleagues and my students and in my professional world as speaking about and therefore for Jews. I obviously don't speak for Jews. I do speak about them. There have been times in my life when I've worn a kippah, times that I haven't, times that I sometimes put on a kippah because I want to be sort of seen as being a Jew in certain space, even though now I don't wear it as a matter of course. And in some sense, I'm looked to by others to sort of speak about or speak to Jewish issues. And I like to teach Jewish community leaders in this country, something that I'm invited to do from time to time. Yeah, I guess I do.
Norman, the organization is called the Association of Canadian Jewish Studies. It's a national member-run organization that brings together academics, students, professionals, and other interests in the study of the Jewish experience in Canada. How can people be in touch with you? And is it open to anybody?
Sure. So our memberships are not expensive. Our website is a good first way in, and then you can find your way to a lot of the projects that David is describing, which are more open-ended in terms of their venue and the medium that they're using. So putting in the title of the association will find our very useful website. Yeah, very ecumenical, wide open membership, of course.
Can anybody get the journal?
Yeah, and it's available openly on the internet. So by way of our website, connect to the journal itself or the journal by way of the journal's name, and those articles are available freely.
Yeah, that's free and open access. We also do offer a print-on-demand service if people want an actual hard copy of the journal, and that's through Amazon. So you can order one straight to your own home whenever you like. Maybe in the show notes we can put both the association website and the journal's website if people want to go. Lots of academic journals are actually behind a firewall, so you can only get them if you've paid some kind of subscription through a university, but ours is open access.
Yeah.
Dentists are not normally liked. Are professors not liked generally?
Like
people like them? Yeah.
Depends on the marks you give to some degree.
It's all about marks.
No, if it works in the classroom, they like you. So it's our job to make it work. I would say, yeah.
Do you have students come up to you, David, a few years later and say, "Thank you so much for what you've contributed to my life"?
Sure, I do. In fact, it just happened the other day at a restaurant around the corner from my house, where a guy that I taught like 6 years ago was like, "Oh, I can't believe I'm seeing you." And then he told me he's going to grad school now. He took a few years off, and it was nice. So you do get that sometimes.
Is that your biggest reward, would you say?
Oh, there are many great rewards. I love the job. I mean, there's a certain number of students who are committed and interested. Some of them are struggling and I'm interested in them. And some of them are outstanding. I'm interested in them. There's a lot of people who are neither struggling nor good, and they just kind of come and go. And that's fine too. I'm happy to just have those people ride along and learn what they can. But there are a good number of them every year in all the different classes that I teach that really make a good connection. And that's part of it. But there's so many other things that we professors do other than teach, and they have their own satisfactions as well. And for me personally, I'm really happy that I have a job where I get to do different things. I can focus on, I can do teaching, and I can do research, and I can do kind of academic, entrepreneurial, institution building things. And there's lots of different things that one can do. And I would be much less happy if I had to do any one of those things over and over again.
I think in my next life, I'm going to try to get a job as a professor.
Do it.
Yeah, you guys fascinate me. You really do.
Cut the
You
lawn
really
in
do.
the summertime.
No, seriously, I think what you do is so commendable, and also it seems like a really fun gig. It really does. Get to think, you get to be creative. What else can you ask for, especially as a Jew? That's what we're all about, right, Norman?
Well, spend time with young people too. Well,
Yeah.
into your later on years, a new group of young people every season coming your way.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for listening and for watching. I always like to bring sort of a synopsis to you at the conclusion of our shows as to what you can take away from what we just discussed. And I do that because the show is all about paying homage to humankind through inspirational interviews. I think what I take away from this interview, both how Norman and David are so incredibly proud of their Jewishness, of your Jewishness. And not only you're willing to sort of sit there and in the wee hours of the night think to yourself, my God, oh, am I lucky to have been born into this people? And sometimes not. But you've actually taken the next step, which is to go out there and share it with so many others. And for that, I say kol hakavod, because my belief is that every single Jew has to play a role in our peoplehood, is in particular today, because we have to bring the beautiful messages of the Jewish people, who we are, community, tikkun olam, repairing the world, how we work together, the state of Israel, and its incredible development over the last very short 70 odd years. I actually believe that when people hear about our Jewishness, that I think David alluded to this before, that it can really often change their views about who we are as a people. So get out there, be an active Jew, show your wares, and make sure that people hear you. And with that, once again, I want to thank Norm Raven. Norm, thank you so much. Did a beautiful
Thanks,
job.
Norm.
And David Kaufman, and I wish you all kinds of success in your work and also in the organization. And I'll make sure to post about it with your website so people can find. As they say in Yiddish, go in good health, and we look forward to sharing all kinds of ideas with you in the near future. Thank you.